Good morning, friends. I'm continuing our study in Revelation, but I want to clarify this morning a few matters that I mentioned last time that I think need to be corrected. When we study Revelation, the thing we need to realize is that God is the only one who knows when all these events are going to take place. Now, there are some signs and some instances that give us a little bit clarification. If we didn't have them, then Revelation would be difficult to understand. So there are some types of chronology which I try to explain. In our last study, I tried to divide them up and try to give you some idea of when all these things will take place. I think, to the most part, I think I had the events correct. But I said something about the great angel in chapter 10 that needed to be corrected. I was wrong in what I said last week. I said those events in chapter 10 could be taken place at the beginning after the messages of the seven churches. But upon further investigation of the passage itself, I was rebuked and discovered that this great angel appears just before the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So I was incorrect by saying that it could take place earlier. It couldn't. It's clearly stated. And it's interesting that this angel uh, begins to speak to John, and his message encompasses both the events in chapter 11 and chapter 12, leading up to the period of chapter 13, where the reign of Antichrist is given in more detail. So I think I just needed to clarify this matter a little bit. When I first began this series of messages on prophecy, I thought it necessary to share with you the teachings of Paul the Apostle regarding the coming of the Lord. So I did a study in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And that time I mentioned that Paul was speaking to a people who were facing some problems over some information they received that the resurrection had already taken place and Jesus came. Now, we could imagine in our own mind if someone told us that today and we got left behind, it'd be a serious matter. So Paul nips it in the bud, so to speak, and he deals with it right on and head on. He tells them in Revelation, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and we must understand the purpose of this chapter. It's to clarify misunderstandings they had regarding the problem of Jesus coming. And the first thing that Paul said was there are going to be two things that happen before that day. That day referring to the coming of Christ. It doesn't make any difference how many interpretations the commentators give to that day. Paul is talking about the coming of Jesus, the first resurrection, so to speak. And he says two events will take place that will give us a warning that Jesus is coming. The first is the great apostasy, the falling away from truth, the lack of understanding and desire for the scriptures. All that's going to take place first. People will deny the gospel. It's called the apostasia, the great apostasy. It's not the rapture of the church. It's an apostasy. So we dealt with that. The second thing he said is going to happen is the rising of Antichrist. And at that time, it says that God will send a great delusion on unfaithful people that they should believe the lie. And during this time, of course, they're going to receive the mark of the beast and not realizing it's happening. So that's all I need to say on that. But in Second Thessalonians, that is the basic message that Paul gave to these Christians who were concerned that they may have been left behind and Jesus had come already. Now we come to the teaching of Jesus regarding that day. And it's found in Matthew 24. I think there's probably a lot of people that know very little about Matthew 24. They should know a lot about it if we've ever studied anything about the coming of Christ, because everything we need to know is found in Matthew 24 and 25. And these are the words and the instructions given by Jesus alone regarding that day. Again, we're talking about the coming of the Lord. And Jesus himself says, as to the time, no one knows about the time except the Father only. So that clarifies the matter as to men trying to determine by various manipulations of history and time and mathematics to try to predict exactly when it's going to happen. Jesus says he doesn't even know. He says it's in the hands of the Father only. So that should settle it in our minds when we begin to listen to these prophetic teachers trying to tell us something about events that are going to take place before Jesus comes. The only person we should listen to in regard to this matter is Jesus himself. All the rest of the people ought to be students of Jesus. But somehow or other, they think they're smart enough to add to what Jesus had to say. And we talked about the consequences of adding to and taking away from the revelation. And so men who dare to do that have to face the consequences of their actions. Well, I probably have said enough, but I just want to clarify that mistake. Oh, incidentally, in case you didn't get it, when I first started teaching, I taught that John was on the Isle of Patmos and it was the Emperor Dionysius. There's no such thing as Dionysius as an emperor. His name was Diocletian, and it happened about 23 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, when John was banished to the island of Patmos. So there are people who say, well, all the events of Matthew 24 have been fulfilled in 70 AD. Well, that can't be true because the book of Revelation wasn't written then, and they didn't have all the information that was necessary. In order to come to that conclusion, they had to conclude that John must have written the Revelation before AD 70. He didn't. The fact remains that he was banished to the island of Patmos during the reign of Diocletian. That's a historical fact, and it was around 92 AD. So sometimes these little matters clear up a lot of the mistakes and the ideas put forth, and we don't have to worry about listening to them when history and prophecy and scripture contradicts it all. So I just wanted to put this together to clarify any mistakes I have made in the past. And hopefully we can go forward with the truth and not worry about our various mistaken ideas. Friends, as we study Revelation, I perceive that there's going to be some time in life where we have to make some changes as to our understanding. Revelation is still prophecy. These things that are mentioned are in the mind and the hands of God. We have limited information, and as far as I can understand, until Jesus comes, it'll be imperfect information. So there's always room for change, as long as we're honest enough to admit that we're wrong. And sometimes that's a big problem with some people. I don't have a problem with it because I'm not trying to conceal anything. I'm just trying to declare the truth as I understand it. I put it that way because sometimes my understanding is limited too. Well, we'll see you later. Thank you for paying attention. I promise we'll get back with you. In our next study, we'll begin doing something on the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. I think that's very important, and I want to expound that carefully. See you later.